Montana Territory, 1875. The unforgiving sun beat down on the dusty trail winding through pine-covered mountains, where Clara Sutton urged her exhausted horse forward. At 23, she possessed a delicate beauty that belied her iron determination. Her honey-blonde hair was hastily pinned beneath a wide-brimmed hat, tendrils escaping to frame a face where intelligence and wariness battled in her bright blue eyes. The plain brown traveling dress she wore was crumpled from days in the saddle, a stark contrast to the finely tailored garments she'd once known. Clara glanced over her shoulder for the 100th time, her heart pounding with each hoofbeat that carried her deeper into the wilderness. 3 days since she'd fled Helena, and still the fear gripped her. Trust was a luxury she could no longer afford, not after what she'd seen, what she knew. The frontier might be harsh and unforgiving, but it offered something precious: anonymity. Out here, a person could disappear, reinvent themselves, survive, and surviving was all that mattered now. "People only bring trouble," she whispered to her horse as the animal struggled up a steep incline. "Keep to yourself and keep moving. That's the only way to stay alive out here." It was a harsh philosophy for one so young, but Clara had learned its truth the hard way. Back east, she'd believed in goodness, in justice, in people. The frontier had stripped away those illusions one by one, leaving her with nothing but the clothes on her back and the desperate need to keep riding west, always west. The trail crested a ridge, revealing the vast Montana landscape spreading out before her. Clara reined her horse to a stop, momentarily overcome by the majesty and the utter isolation. Miles of rugged country without a single sign of civilization. Her mount's labored breathing reminded her that neither of them could continue much longer without rest. The horse was nearly spent, its coat lathered with sweat despite the cool mountain air. "Just a bit further, girl," Clara murmured, patting the animal's neck. "We'll find water soon." As the sun began its descent toward the jagged horizon, Clara spotted a thin line of cottonwoods in the distance, a sure sign of water. Relief flooded through her, only to evaporate instantly at the sound of hoofbeats approaching from behind. Clara's heart leaped to her throat. She considered urging her exhausted mount into a gallop, but knew the animal had nothing left to give. Instead, she guided the horse off the trail and behind a stand of pines, one hand instinctively reaching for the small revolver tucked in her saddlebag. The weapon felt foreign and dangerous in her trembling fingers. A lone rider appeared on the ridge she'd just descended, silhouetted against the amber sky. Even from this distance, Clara could make out the distinctive shape of a cowboy, broad-shouldered and straight-backed in the saddle, his hat pulled low. He paused at the crest, seemingly surveying the landscape, then continued down the trail at an unhurried pace. Clara held her breath as he approached, praying her dappled mare would remain silent. But the horse, sensing water nearby, nickered softly. The cowboy's mount answered with a whinny, and Clara watched in dismay as the rider turned toward her hiding place. "Hello there," he called, his voice carrying clearly through the still evening air. "I don't mean no harm, just passing through, same as you, I reckon." Clara remained silent, the revolver heavy in her hand. "I see you're headed for Cottonwood Creek," he continued, stopping his horse at a respectful distance. "Your mare looks about done in, it's still a fair piece to water, and there's mountain lion sign ahead. Might be safer if we rode together." Something in his tone, straightforward, without the oily charm that often masked deceit, made Clara hesitate. She studied him from her hiding place. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 25, with a lean, muscular build that spoke of a life spent in the saddle. His face was handsome beneath 2 or 3 days of light stubble, with clear hazel eyes that crinkled slightly at the corners as if he smiled often. "I can manage on my own," Clara finally replied, keeping the revolver out of sight but ready. The cowboy nodded as if he'd expected this answer. "Name's Thomas Prescott. Most folks call me Trace." He touched the brim of his hat. "Been running cattle up in these parts for the past 4 years." Clara said nothing, offering no name in return. "That creek's on my way," Trace continued, seemingly undeterred by her silence. "I know a safe spot to make camp, good water, sheltered from the wind and defensible." He glanced pointedly at her horse. "No offense, ma'am, but that mare needs rest soon, or you'll be walking come morning." Clara knew he was right. Her horse could barely stand, let alone outrun danger, and night was falling fast in these mountains, bringing with it a bone-deep chill. "I'll ride to the creek," she conceded finally. but I make my own camp. Trace nodded, his expression neutral. As you like, it's another hour's ride though, we'd best get moving before we lose the light. As Clara guided her horse back onto the trail, she noticed that Trace kept a respectful distance, positioning his mount slightly ahead but never crowding her. He didn't press for conversation, and most importantly, he didn't ask why a young woman was riding alone through some of the most unforgiving territory in the Montana wilderness. The sun had nearly set by the time they reached Cottonwood Creek, a clear stream cutting through a small meadow bordered by the white-barked trees that gave it its name. Trace led the way to a natural hollow near the water, protected on three sides by rock formations. "Creek's running clear here," he said, dismounting with the easy grace of a man who spent more time in the saddle than out of it. "There's good grazing for the horses, and those rocks break the wind." Clara slid from her saddle, her legs so stiff she nearly collapsed. Days of hard riding had taken their toll, but she forced herself to stand straight, unwilling to show weakness. "I'll see to my own horse," she said, reaching for the mare's reins. "Never doubted it," Trace replied, already turning to his own mount. "But there's coffee in my saddlebag if you're of a mind. I'll have a fire going shortly." Despite her misgivings, the prospect of hot coffee was too tempting to refuse. Clara tended to her horse, removing the saddle and bridle and rubbing the animal down with a handful of grass before leading her to water. All the while, she kept Trace in her peripheral vision, watching for any sign of threat. But the cowboy went about his business efficiently, gathering wood and building a small, well-contained fire in a ring of stones that had clearly been used before. His movements were deliberate and measured, the kind that conserved energy, the hallmark of a man accustomed to long days of physical labor. "You've camped here before," Clara observed as she finally approached the fire, unable to resist its warmth as the temperature dropped. Trace nodded, handing her a tin cup of coffee. "It's a good stopping point between my ranch and Helena. Safe enough if you know what to watch for." "And what should one watch for?" Clara asked, wrapping her cold fingers around the warm cup. "The usual," Trace replied. "Cats come down to the creek sometimes after dark. There's a band of Blackfoot that hunts these mountains, but they're peaceable enough if you respect their territory." He paused, adding a few sticks to the fire. "And then there's the two-legged predators. They're the ones you really got to watch for." Clara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. "Have you encountered many of those?" "Enough." Trace's expression hardened momentarily, then relaxed. "But most folks out here are just trying to make their way, same as us." He studied her for a moment over the fire. "Hope you don't mind me saying, but you don't strike me as someone used to riding alone through these mountains." Clara stiffened. "I can take care of myself." "Never said you couldn't." Trace raised his hands in a placating gesture. "Just making conversation." They fell into silence as darkness enveloped the camp, broken only by the crackling fire and the gentle burbling of the creek. Clara had expected to feel terrified, alone in the wilderness with a stranger, but instead found herself oddly at ease. Perhaps it was exhaustion, or perhaps it was the way Trace kept a respectful distance, asking nothing and expecting nothing. "I should get some sleep," she said finally, setting aside her empty cup. Trace nodded. "I'll keep first watch. Wake you in a few hours to trade." "That won't be necessary," Clara replied automatically. "With all due respect, ma'am, it is." Trace's voice was gentle but firm. "No one sleeps safely out here without someone keeping watch. I don't know what you're running from, and I don't need to know. But I reckon you didn't come all this way just to die from exhaustion or get picked off by some night prowler because you were too stubborn to accept help." The blunt assessment startled a small laugh from Clara, the first in what felt like ages. "You're very direct, Mr. Prescott." "Trace," he corrected, "and yes, ma'am, I am. Out here, straight talk keeps you alive." Clara hesitated, then nodded. 4 hours. "Then I'll take watch." "Fair enough." Trace settled back against his saddle, rifle across his knees. "Sleep well, miss." "Sutton," she replied after a moment. "Clara Sutton." "Sleep well, Miss Sutton." As Clara arranged her bedroll on the opposite side of the fire, she wondered at her own actions. She'd given him her real name, a foolish risk, yet something about Thomas Trace Prescott inspired a tentative trust she'd thought long extinguished. Perhaps it was the way he rode beside her without pressing for answers, or how he offered help without demanding anything in return. Whatever it was, Clara told herself it didn't matter. Come morning, they would part ways and she would continue her solitary journey, away from the past that pursued her and toward a future she could barely imagine. The frontier was no place for trust or connection, no matter how tempting either might be. But as she drifted into an exhausted sleep, Clara couldn't help but find comfort in the steady presence of the cowboy keeping watch across the fire, the first peaceful rest she'd had in days. Clara woke to the gentle touch of a hand on her shoulder, instantly alert, her heart racing. "Easy," Trace's voice came through the darkness. "It's just me, your watch." The fire had burned down to embers, casting a dim red glow over the camp. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamonds across the vast Montana sky. Clara sat up, shaking off the disorientation of deep sleep. "What time is it?" she asked, her voice husky. Trace checked his pocket watch in the faint firelight. "Just past 2, you slept nearly 5 hours. "You let me sleep an extra hour," Clara accused, reaching for her boots. "Seemed like you needed it," he shrugged, adding wood to the fire. "Coffee's hot if you want some." As Clara poured herself a cup, she studied Trace in the growing firelight. Despite having been awake all night, he seemed alert, his movements still purposeful. But she noticed the slight shadows beneath his eyes, the weariness he tried to hide. "You should rest now," she said. "I'll wake you at dawn." Trace nodded, settling onto his bedroll. "Call out if you see or hear anything unusual." "I sleep light." Within minutes, his breathing had deepened into sleep. Clara wrapped herself in her coat against the mountain chill and moved to sit with her back against a boulder, positioning herself where she could see both the camp and the approach from the trail. The night was alive with sounds, the soft murmur of the creek, the occasional rustle of nocturnal creatures, the distant cry of a hunting owl. Clara found herself watching Trace's sleeping form almost as often as she scanned their surroundings. There was something comforting about his presence, a steadiness that reminded her of a time before fear had become her constant companion. As the first hint of dawn lightened the eastern sky, Clara allowed herself to acknowledge a troubling truth. She didn't want to part ways with Trace Prescott. It wasn't just the safety he provided, though that was certainly part of it. It was the way he treated her, with respect rather than suspicion or predatory interest. The way he seemed to understand her need for space and silence without taking offense. But such wishful thinking was dangerous. Clara had learned the hard way that attachments were vulnerabilities, and vulnerabilities got you killed in the untamed West. No, she would thank him for his assistance and be on her way as soon as the sun rose. The decision made, Clara moved to wake Trace as the first golden rays broke over the mountain peaks. He came awake instantly, one hand moving to the revolver at his side before recognition dawned in his eyes. "Morning," he said, sitting up and stretching. "All quiet." "Not a soul," Clara confirmed. "Though something large moved through the brush across the creek about an hour ago, probably an elk." Trace nodded approvingly. "You've got good ears." They broke camp efficiently, working around each other with the ease of travelers accustomed to early departures. Clara found herself inventing reasons to delay the inevitable parting, checking her saddle straps twice, adjusting her hat, rearranging her meager belongings. Finally, with their horses saddled and ready, Clara knew the moment had come. She cleared her throat. "I appreciate your company to the creek, Mr. Prescott. I won't impose on you further." Trace studied her for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "Where you headed, Miss Sutton?" The question was innocent enough, but Clara hesitated. "West," she said finally. "Beyond that I haven't decided." "West covers a lot of territory," Trace observed mildly. "Any particular reason you're avoiding towns?" Clara stiffened. "I don't recall asking for your assessment of my travel plans." "No, you didn't," Trace agreed, unperturbed by her sharp tone. "But a woman traveling alone through this country tends to draw notice, and someone's clearly after you." "You don't know that," Clara retorted, though her heart raced at his perception. "Don't I?" Trace swung into his saddle with practiced ease. "You're watching the trail behind us more than the one ahead. You sleep with one hand near that revolver you think I haven't noticed. And you've got the look of someone who's seen something they weren't meant to see." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. "Who are you really, Mr. Prescott?" "Exactly who I said. A rancher headed home after delivering cattle to Helena. He adjusted his hat against the morning sun. My place is about 20 miles west of here. The lazy pea, it's not much, but it's growing. I could use an extra hand for a few days if you're looking for work. I'm not a ranch hand, Clara said stiffly. Didn't figure you for one, Trace replied with a slight smile, but you've got the look of someone who can read and cipher. My account books are in shameful condition and I've got correspondence piling up. He shrugged. Pays fair, the work's honest, and no one would think to look for you there. Clara regarded him suspiciously. Why would you offer such a thing to a stranger? Maybe I'm just tired of my own company, Trace said. Then more seriously, or maybe I know what it's like to need a safe place to catch your breath. The offer tempted Clara more than she cared to admit. A few days' respite, a chance to earn money and plan her next move, and despite her ingrained caution, she found herself trusting Trace Prescott. 3 days, she said finally. I'll stay 3 days, help with your books, and then move on. Trace nodded as if he'd expected nothing less. Fair enough, we should reach the ranch by midday. As they rode west together, Clara fought a silent battle with herself. Every instinct honed by recent events warned against trusting anyone, especially a man she'd just met. Yet there was something about Trace that defied her careful categorization of potential threats. He didn't push for information or explanations. He simply rode beside her, occasionally pointing out landmarks or sharing bits of local knowledge, but mostly maintaining a comfortable silence. By the time the sun stood high overhead, Clara could see their destination in the distance, a modest ranch nestled in a verdant valley between 2 ridges. A sturdy log cabin sat at its center, with a barn, corral, and several outbuildings arranged nearby. Cattle grazed on the rolling hills and smoke rose from the cabin's stone chimney. Home sweet home, Trace said, a note of pride in his voice. It's not much compared to some of the big spreads, but it's mine. Every log, every fence post. Clara found herself unexpectedly moved by the simple declaration. You built it yourself. Most of it, Trace confirmed, had help with the barn raising from neighbors. Out here, folks lend a hand when needed. He gestured toward the cabin. Mrs. Wilkins comes up from the settlement twice a week to cook and clean. She's there now, you can see the smoke. As they approached, a short, stout woman emerged from the cabin, wiping her hands on her apron. Her gray hair was pulled back in a severe bun, but her round face creased into a smile at the sight of Trace. About time you showed your face, Thomas Prescott, she called. I was beginning to think the wolves got you. Not yet, Mrs. Wilkins, Trace replied good-naturedly as they dismounted, though they're welcome to try. We have a guest, Miss Clara Sutton. She'll be helping me sort out the books for a few days. Mrs. Wilkins gave Clara a frank, assessing look that softened into a welcoming smile. Well, it's about time someone tackled that disaster he calls bookkeeping. Come in, child. You look like you could use a hot meal and a proper wash. Clara found herself shepherded into the cabin before she could protest, Trace's amused voice following them. I'll see to the horses. The interior of the cabin was surprisingly spacious and meticulously clean. A large main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a sturdy table, comfortable chairs, and a stone fireplace where a pot of something delicious-smelling simmered. 2 doors led off from the main room, bedrooms, Clara assumed. You'll stay in the spare room, Mrs. Wilkins said, gesturing to one of the doors. I've put fresh linens on the bed. There's water heating for a bath, and I've laid out some soap and towels. Overwhelmed by the woman's matter-of-fact kindness, Clara could only nod her thanks. Now, Mrs. Wilkins continued, hands on her ample hips. I've got stew on the fire and bread in the oven. You go get cleaned up, and we'll have a proper meal when you're done. An hour later, bathed, dressed in clean clothes, and with her hair neatly braided, Clara felt more human than she had in days. The stew was hearty and delicious, the bread still warm from the oven. Trace, who had also cleaned up, sat across from her at the table, his manner as relaxed and undemanding as it had been on the trail. Mrs. Wilkins is the best cook in 3 counties, he declared, helping himself to another bowl. I'd waste away to nothing without her. Flattery won't get you an extra pie, the older woman retorted, but Clara could see she was pleased by the compliment. Now I've got to be getting back to town before dark, you two mind yourselves. She gave Clara a reassuring pat on the shoulder. Don't let him work you too hard, dear. Those books have been a mess for years. They can wait another day if need be. After Mrs. Wilkins' departure, Trace showed Clara to a small desk in the corner of the main room, where ledgers and correspondence were stacked in precarious piles. "As you can see, organization isn't my strong suit," he admitted ruefully. "I can break a wild horse and track a steer through a blizzard, but numbers make my head spin." Clara surveyed the chaos with a professional eye. "I worked as a clerk in a mercantile for 2 years," she said. "This isn't so bad. I can have it sorted in a couple of days." "Take your time," Trace said. "I've got ranch work to keep me busy." He hesitated, then added, "The door has a lock if that would make you feel safer. And no one comes up here without business, certainly no one from Helena." The reference to her flight from Helena was subtle but clear. Trace was letting her know that whatever she was running from, she was safe here. The gesture touched Clara deeply. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything." Trace merely nodded, then headed for the door. "I've got to check the north pasture. Make yourself at home." Left alone in the cabin, Clara found herself drawn to the window, watching as Trace mounted his horse and rode toward the distant hills. There was something compelling about him, a quiet strength that demanded nothing yet offered support nonetheless. It was dangerous to notice such things, dangerous to feel the stirrings of attraction to a man she barely knew. Yet as she turned to the task at hand, Clara couldn't help but wonder if she'd found more than just temporary shelter at the Lazy P. Perhaps, just perhaps, she'd found a place where she could breathe freely again, if only for a little while. The next 3 days fell into an unexpected rhythm. Clara spent her mornings organizing Trace's accounts, bringing order to years of haphazard bookkeeping. The work was satisfying, requiring enough concentration to keep her mind from dwelling on what or who might be pursuing her. In the afternoons, she often sat on the cabin's porch, continuing her work as the Montana sunshine warmed her shoulders. Trace came and went, attending to the endless tasks of running a cattle ranch. He never intruded on her space or questioned her about her past, but he was unfailingly courteous, checking to ensure she had everything she needed. In the evenings, they shared simple meals, their conversation gradually moving from the practicalities of ranch life to more personal territories. She learned that Trace had come west from Pennsylvania after the war, determined to build something of his own away from the crowded East. He'd worked as a cowhand on several large spreads before saving enough to stake his claim on the land that became the Lazy P. "It was nothing but wilderness when I found it," he told her one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and crimson. "Took me 2 years just to get the cabin and barn built. Another year to buy my first small herd." His voice held quiet pride. "Now I've got almost 300 head and the best grazing land in the county." "You've accomplished a great deal," Clara observed. "Most men would have given up." Trace shrugged. "I'm stubborn that way. Once I set my mind to something, I see it through." He glanced at her. "What about you, Clara? What were you before?" "Before I became a fugitive," she supplied when he trailed off tactfully. "I was going to say before you decided to see the West," Trace corrected with a small smile. Clara looked out over the valley, considering how much to share. "I was a teacher in St. Louis," she said finally. "Then a bookkeeper for a mercantile in Helena. And now I'm a woman who knows too much about the wrong people." The words slipped out before she could stop them, and Clara tensed, waiting for the questions that would surely follow. But Trace merely nodded as if she'd commented on the weather. "Powerful men don't like their secrets known," he observed, "especially in places like Helena where money talks louder than justice." His perception was unsettling. "You seem to know a lot about such matters." "I've seen my share." Trace's expression darkened momentarily. "The West brings out the best and worst in people. Some come to build, some to destroy, some just to take what they can." They fell silent, watching as the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the evening sky. Clara found herself acutely aware of Trace beside her, the clean scent of soap and leather that clung to him, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the way his presence made her feel both unsettled and secure. On the third day, as Clara put the finishing touches on Trace's now immaculate accounts, she felt a growing sense of dread. Tomorrow she would leave, as agreed. The thought brought a hollow feeling she hadn't anticipated. In just 3 days, the Lazy P had begun to feel like a haven, and Trace Prescott had become someone she didn't want to leave behind. but staying was impossible. Whatever temporary safety she'd found here, Clara knew her pursuers wouldn't give up so easily. The longer she remained, the greater the risk, not just to herself but to Trace as well. She couldn't bear the thought of bringing danger to this man who had shown her nothing but kindness. That evening, as they sat at the table after dinner, Clara cleared her throat. "I've finished organizing your accounts," she said, striving for a businesslike tone. "Everything's in order now. You shouldn't have any trouble keeping them that way if you follow the system I've set up." Trace studied her for a long moment. "You're still planning to leave tomorrow?" It wasn't a question, but Clara nodded anyway. "That was our agreement, 3 days. "Agreements can be amended," Trace said quietly. "There's plenty more work here if you want it. The ranch is growing, I could use the help." Clara looked away, unable to meet his gaze. "It's not that simple." "It could be," Trace countered. "Whatever you're running from, whoever you're running from, they have no reason to look for you here." "You don't understand," Clara said, a hint of desperation creeping into her voice. "These are dangerous men. They won't stop looking just because I've disappeared." "Then tell me what we're up against," Trace said, leaning forward. "Let me help." "We," Clara echoed. "There is no we, Mr. Prescott. I'm grateful for your hospitality, but I can't involve you in my problems." "You involved me the moment you agreed to come to my ranch," Trace replied, his voice gentle but firm. "And it's a little late to go back to Mr. Prescott, don't you think?" Clara stood abruptly, moving to the window. Outside, darkness had fallen, the vast Montana night pressing against the glass. "You don't know what you're offering," she said softly. "You don't know what it could cost you." She heard Trace rise and move to stand behind her, not touching her but close enough that she could feel his presence. "I know exactly what I'm offering," he said. "Safety, sanctuary. For as long as you need it." Clara turned to face him, suddenly angry at his persistence, at the hope he was kindling within her. "And what do you want in return? No man offers something for nothing." The moment the words left her mouth, she regretted them. Hurt flashed across Trace's face before he carefully masked it. "Is that what you think of me?" he asked quietly. "That I brought you here expecting something in return?" "No," Clara admitted, the anger draining away as quickly as it had come. "No, I don't think that of you, but I don't understand why you would risk yourself for a stranger." Trace was silent for a long moment. "Maybe because I don't see a stranger when I look at you, Clara. I see a woman of courage and intelligence, running from something that frightens her badly enough to make her flee into the wilderness alone." His voice softened. "And maybe, just maybe, I see someone worth protecting." The simple declaration left Clara speechless. In Trace's eyes, she saw something she hadn't encountered in a very long time, genuine concern untainted by ulterior motives. "I saw a murder," she said finally, the words escaping in a rush. "In Helena, Judge Raymond Wilson. He was shot in his chambers by a man named Victor Hollister, one of the wealthiest mine owners in the territory. I was delivering accounts to the judge when it happened. I hid behind a curtain. Saw everything." Trace's expression remained steady. "And Hollister saw you?" Clara nodded. "Not at first. I managed to slip away. But later that day, men came to the boarding house where I was staying. They'd been asking questions, describing me. I packed what I could carry and left that night." "Hollister has a reputation," Trace acknowledged grimly. "He doesn't like loose ends." "The judge was going to rule against him in a claim dispute," Clara continued. "It would have cost Hollister millions. Apparently, he decided it was cheaper to eliminate the problem." "And now you're the only witness," Trace concluded, "which makes you a problem he'll want to eliminate as well." "You see why I can't stay," Clara said quietly. "Hollister has men everywhere if they track me here." "They'd be making a serious mistake," Trace interrupted, his tone hardening. "This is my land, Clara. I know every inch of it. I've defended it against rustlers, claim jumpers, and worse." He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Stay. At least until we can figure out a safer plan than you riding alone through territory Hollister practically owns." Clara wanted desperately to believe it was possible, that she could remain in this peaceful valley with this man who made her feel safe for the first time in weeks. But fear still gripped her heart. "I need to think," she said finally. "Please." Trace nodded, stepping back to give her space. Take all the time you need, my offer stands. That night, Clara lay awake long after Trace had retired to his room, her mind churning with indecision. Staying meant risking Trace's safety for her own comfort. Leaving meant facing the wilderness alone again, always looking over her shoulder, always running. But there was a third consideration that Clara could no longer ignore, the growing attachment she felt toward Trace Prescott. In just a few days, he had come to represent everything she'd thought impossible on the frontier: safety, understanding, the possibility of connection. And that scared her almost as much as Hollister's men. Dawn was breaking when Clara finally made her decision. She rose quietly, packing her few belongings. She would leave a note thanking Trace for his kindness, explaining why she couldn't stay. It was the only responsible choice. But as she moved into the main room of the cabin, she found Trace already awake, coffee brewing on the stove. He took one look at her packed saddlebag and nodded once, his expression resigned but understanding. "At least have some coffee before you go," he said, pouring a cup and setting it on the table. "And take some provisions. There's jerky and hardtack in the pantry." Gratitude and regret twisted in Clara's chest. "I'm sorry," she began. "I just can't." She was interrupted by the distant sound of hoofbeats, several horses approaching at speed. Trace moved swiftly to the window, pushing aside the curtain to look out. "5 riders," he reported, his voice suddenly hard. "Coming fast up the valley road." Clara's blood ran cold. Hollister's men. "Can't tell yet." Trace reached for his rifle, checking that it was loaded. "But they're not riding like neighbors coming to visit." Fear gripped Clara, not for herself but for Trace. "This is my fault. I've brought them straight to you." "We don't know that yet," Trace said calmly, though his eyes had taken on a steely quality Clara hadn't seen before. "But if it is Hollister's bunch, they've made a critical error coming onto my land uninvited." He moved to a trunk near the fireplace, unlocking it and withdrawing a second rifle and a box of ammunition. "Can you shoot?" Clara nodded. Her father had taught her the basics years ago, though she'd never fired at anything more threatening than a paper target. "Good." Trace handed her the weapon. "Stay inside. If shooting starts, keep away from the windows." Before she could protest, he was out the door, moving with the fluid grace of a man completely at home in his environment. Clara watched through the window as he positioned himself casually on the porch, rifle held loosely but ready as the riders approached. Even from a distance, Clara could tell these were not ordinary ranch hands. They rode with a predatory confidence, weapons prominently displayed. The man in the lead was tall and gaunt, with a shock of silver hair visible beneath his black hat, a face Clara recognized with a jolt of terror from wanted posters in Helena. Wade Dalton, a hired gun known for his ruthless efficiency. "Morning, gentlemen," Trace called out as the riders pulled up in front of the cabin. "Something I can help you with." Dalton surveyed the ranch with cold eyes before fixing his gaze on Trace. "Looking for a woman," he said without preamble. "Blonde, blue-eyed, early 20s, riding a dappled mare. Trail leads this way." "Haven't seen anyone matching that description," Trace replied easily. "Not much traffic through these parts except my neighbors." "Mind if we have a look around?" Dalton asked, though his tone made it clear it wasn't a request. Trace's posture remained relaxed, but Clara could see the tension in his shoulders. "Actually, I do mind. This is private property." One of the other riders spat into the dust. "We ain't asking permission, Cowboy." "That's unfortunate," Trace said, his voice cooling, "because I'm not giving permission. And trespassing in this territory tends to end badly." Dalton's hand moved toward his holster, but Trace's rifle was already leveled at his chest, the motion so swift Clara barely saw it happen. "I wouldn't," Trace advised quietly, "not unless you're certain you're faster than a bullet." The standoff held for a tense moment, the only sound the creak of leather and the snorting of horses. Then Dalton smiled, a cold, humorless expression that didn't reach his eyes. "No need to get unfriendly," he said, raising his hands slightly. "We're just following orders." "And I'm just protecting what's mine," Trace replied. "Now you boys have a choice. You can ride away nice and peaceful, or you can see how many of you I can put in the ground before the last man standing gets lucky." Clara watched in horrified fascination as Dalton weighed his options, clearly calculating the odds. Finally, he nodded almost imperceptibly. We'll be moving on, he conceded. But you might want to consider the company you keep, rancher. Victor Hollister doesn't take kindly to those who interfere with his business. And I don't take kindly to threats on my land, Trace countered. Hollister's reach ends at my property line. You do well to remember that. Dalton's eyes narrowed, but he made a gesture to his companions. Let's ride. Clara held her breath as the men wheeled their horses around. For a terrible moment, she thought Dalton might attempt something despite the rifle trained on him. But ultimately, all 5 riders moved off, taking the valley road back toward town. Trace remained on the porch, rifle ready, until the riders disappeared from view. Only then did he lower the weapon and turn toward the cabin, his face grim. Clara met him at the door, her own rifle still clutched in trembling hands. "They'll be back," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "with more men." "Probably," Trace agreed, taking the rifle gently from her grip. "But not today. They need to report back to Hollister first." "Then I need to leave immediately," Clara insisted. "They've already connected me to you. If I go now, maybe." "That's exactly what they want," Trace interrupted. "They expect you to run. They'll have men watching the trails, waiting for exactly that." "Then what do you suggest?" Clara demanded, frustration and fear making her voice sharp. "That I hide here forever while they circle closer." Trace set both rifles on the table, his movements deliberate. "No," he said, meeting her gaze steadily. "I suggest we fight back." "Fight back," Clara echoed incredulously. "Against Victor Hollister, one of the most powerful men in the territory." "Powerful men aren't invincible," Trace replied, "especially when their power is built on corruption and murder." "What are you talking about?" Trace took a deep breath. "Judge Wilson wasn't the first to die for standing against Hollister. 3 years ago, my brother Daniel came west to join me. He was a lawyer, fresh from school back east. Got a position with the territorial prosecutor's office in Helena." Understanding dawned on Clara. He was building a case against Hollister. Trace nodded, pain flashing across his features. "Daniel discovered evidence of claim jumping, bribery, even murder. He was preparing to bring charges when they found him in an alley behind the courthouse. Official report called it a robbery gone wrong." "I'm so sorry," Clara said softly, reaching out to touch his arm. "I knew it was Hollister," Trace continued. "Everyone knew, but there was no proof, and Hollister's money silenced any questions." His jaw tightened. "I've been watching, waiting for a chance to bring him down ever since." "And now I've provided that chance," Clara realized. "A witness to murder." "You're the key," Trace confirmed. "With your testimony, we could finally see justice done, not just for Judge Wilson, but for Daniel and all of Hollister's victims." The magnitude of what he was proposing settled over Clara like a physical weight. "It would be your word and mine against one of the richest men in Montana," she said slowly. "Even with my testimony, it might not be enough." "Maybe not," Trace acknowledged, "but for the first time we have a real chance. The new territorial governor is coming to Helena next week for the Founders' Day celebration. He's a reformer, not in Hollister's pocket. If we could get to him, tell him what you saw." "It would be incredibly dangerous," Clara warned. "Hollister will have men watching everywhere." "Yes," Trace agreed, "but some risks are worth taking." He stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. "Clara, I'm not asking you to do this. I understand if you want to keep running. But if you decide to stay and fight, I swear I'll do everything in my power to protect you." Clara looked into his earnest face, seeing the determination there and something more, something that made her heart quicken despite the fear. She thought of Judge Wilson, murdered for doing his duty, of Daniel Prescott, killed for seeking justice, of all the others who had suffered under Hollister's corruption. "If we do this," she said finally, "we need a plan. A good one." Relief and admiration flooded Trace's expression. "We'll need help," he said. "People we can trust." "And who might that be?" Clara asked skeptically. "Hollister seems to own half the territory." "Not everyone," Trace replied with a slight smile. "The first rule of the frontier. Know who your true allies are." He moved to the desk where Clara had organized his correspondence. "Let me show you something." Over the next several days, Clara watched in growing amazement as Trace's plan took shape. Letters were dispatched via trusted ranch hands to various locations throughout the territory. Visitors began arriving at the Lazy P, hardened men and women who shared a common hatred for Victor Hollister and all he represented. There was Marshal James Cooper, who had been investigating Hollister for years but lacked the evidence to move against him. Mrs. Wilkins, whose late husband had lost his mining claim to Hollister's machinations. Benjamin Two Wolves, a Blackfoot scout who had witnessed Hollister's men massacre a small hunting party on disputed land. And others, shopkeepers, ranchers, miners, all with reasons to see Hollister's reign of corruption end. "I had no idea you had such a network," Clara remarked to Trace as they watched the Marshal and Two Wolves discussing security arrangements for their journey to Helena. "Daniel started it," Trace explained. "After his death I maintained the connections, added to them. We've been gathering evidence against Hollister for years, but without an eyewitness to a major crime, we couldn't break through his protection." Clara felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. "And now it all depends on me." Trace touched her hand briefly. "Not just you, all of us together." As the day of the governor's visit approached, the plan was refined and strengthened. Clara would travel to Helena disguised as Mrs. Wilkins' niece, arriving on the morning coach rather than on horseback. Marshal Cooper would arrange a private meeting with the governor, away from the public celebrations where Hollister's men would be watching. Trace and Two Wolves would provide security, ensuring Clara reached the meeting safely. The night before their departure, Clara found herself unable to sleep, the magnitude of what they were attempting weighing heavily on her mind. She slipped out of the cabin, walking to the small rise behind the barn where Trace had shown her the best view of the stars. She wasn't entirely surprised to find him already there, standing silent in the moonlight, looking out over his land. "Can't sleep either?" she asked softly, coming to stand beside him. Trace shook his head. "Too much on my mind." "Second thoughts?" Clara ventured. "No," he replied without hesitation, "just considering all the possibilities, good and bad." They stood in companionable silence for a time, the vast Montana night spread out around them, stars blazing overhead. Clara was acutely aware of Trace beside her, of how, in just a short time, his presence had come to represent safety in a world that had suddenly turned dangerous. "I never thanked you properly," she said finally. "For what?" Trace asked, turning to look at her. "For riding beside me that day on the trail," Clara said. "For not asking why I was running, for offering shelter when you had no reason to trust me." Trace's expression softened. "Some things don't need explaining. I recognize something in you, Clara, a kindred spirit maybe." "Is that all?" Clara found herself asking, her heart suddenly racing. In the silvery moonlight, Trace's gaze was steady and clear. "No," he admitted quietly, "that's not all." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and touched her cheek with gentle fingers. "From the moment I saw you on that trail, something told me you were important, that our paths crossing wasn't just chance." Clara leaned into his touch, all the barriers she'd carefully constructed beginning to crumble. "I was taught that the frontier is no place for sentiment," she whispered. "That out here, trust is a luxury that gets you killed." "Sometimes," Trace acknowledged. "And sometimes it's the only thing that keeps you alive." His hand moved to cup her face. "I know the timing is terrible. We're facing danger, uncertainty." "And yet," Clara said, finding courage she hadn't known she possessed, "I can't imagine facing it with anyone else." The admission hung between them, honest and vulnerable. Then Trace leaned forward, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that was both question and answer, tender yet filled with promise. Clara responded without hesitation, her arms circling his neck as something long dormant within her awakened. When they finally parted, Trace rested his forehead against hers. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he murmured, "know that finding you has been worth every risk." Clara closed her eyes, allowing herself to believe, just for this moment, that there could be a future beyond danger and flight, a future with this man who had proven that even on the harsh frontier, kindness and courage still existed. "We should try to rest," she said reluctantly. "Tomorrow will test us all." Trace nodded, taking her hand as they walked back toward the cabin. At the door he paused, lifting her fingers to his lips. "Sleep well, Clara Sutton." "And you, Trace Prescott," she replied, her heart lighter despite the dangers that awaited them. Dawn broke clear and cold over the Lazy P as the small party made final preparations for the journey to Helena. Clara, dressed in a borrowed gown and bonnet that transformed her appearance from that of a solitary rider to a respectable young woman, watched as Trace conferred with two wolves near the corral. "Ready, dear Mrs. Wilkins asked, approaching with a basket over her arm. "We should leave soon if we're to make the morning coach." Clara nodded, though her stomach twisted with nerves. "As ready as I'll ever be." "You're doing a brave thing," the older woman said, patting her hand. "Braver than most would dare." Before Clara could respond, Trace joined them, his expression serious. "Two wolves will escort you to the coach station," he said. "Marshal Cooper has already gone ahead to Helena to arrange things with the governor's staff. I'll follow a different route and meet you at the boarding house near the courthouse." Clara understood the strategy. They were deliberately separating to avoid drawing attention, but she couldn't suppress a flash of anxiety at the thought of being parted from Trace. As if sensing her concern, Trace took her hands in his. "It's safer this way," he said gently. "Mrs. Wilkins will be with you the whole time, and Two Wolves is the best scout in the territory. No one will get past him." "I know," Clara assured him, squeezing his hands. "It's just—" "I know," Trace's eyes conveyed what words couldn't, that their newfound connection made separation, even tactical and temporary, difficult to bear. The journey to the coach station passed without incident, Two Wolves riding ahead and behind alternately, his sharp eyes scanning the landscape for any sign of danger. The crowded coach to Helena proved an effective disguise. Clara was just one more passenger among many, unremarkable in her modest dress and bonnet, conversing quietly with her aunt. Helena had changed little in the weeks since Clara's hasty departure. The bustling territorial capital was even more active than usual, with banners and decorations announcing the governor's impending visit. As they disembarked from the coach, Clara kept her head down, acutely aware that Hollister's men might be watching the arrivals. "This way, dear," Mrs. Wilkins said, guiding her through the crowded streets toward a modest boarding house several blocks from the main thoroughfare. "Miss Abigail is expecting us." The boarding house proved to be a haven of quiet efficiency, its proprietress a stern-faced woman who asked no questions and clearly knew more about their situation than her tight-lipped expression revealed. Clara and Mrs. Wilkins were shown to a room on the second floor, with windows overlooking a back garden rather than the street, a security precaution, Clara realized. "The marshal will be by later this evening," Miss Abigail informed them as she handed over the key. "He said to tell you all is arranged for tomorrow morning." "And the other gentleman?" Mrs. Wilkins inquired delicately. "Expected by nightfall." Miss Abigail's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Rest now. You'll be safe here." The hours passed slowly. Clara alternated between pacing the small room and sitting tensely by the window, watching the garden below for any sign of Trace. Mrs. Wilkins busied herself with mending, her calm presence a steadying influence despite the tension. Dusk was falling when a soft knock at their door announced Marshal Cooper's arrival. The lawman's weathered face was grave as he outlined the final arrangements. "The governor will receive you at 8 tomorrow morning, before the public celebrations begin," he explained. "His personal secretary has arranged a private entrance through the territorial offices. Two Wolves will scout the route ahead and signal if there's trouble." "And Hollister?" Clara asked, voicing the concern that had plagued her throughout the day. "He'll be at the celebrations, front and center like always," Cooper replied with a grimace, "but he doesn't know about the meeting. Far as anyone's aware, the governor's morning is dedicated to reviewing his speech." "And Trace?" Clara couldn't keep the worry from her voice. The marshal's expression softened slightly. "No sign of him yet, but that's not unusual. Prescott knows how to move unseen when he needs to." As if summoned by his name, another knock came at the door, a distinct pattern that brought relief flooding through Clara. Cooper opened it to reveal Trace, his trail clothes exchanged for a respectable suit that transformed him from rugged rancher to gentleman. Clara rose instinctively, crossing the room to him. Trace took her hands, his eyes scanning her face. "Everything all right?" "It is now," she said simply. Marshal Cooper cleared his throat. "I'll make one more round of the perimeter," he said, tactfully giving them a moment of privacy. Mrs. Wilkins followed him, murmuring something about checking on dinner arrangements. When the door closed, Trace drew Clara into his arms, holding her close. "I've been worried about you," he admitted, his voice low against her hair. "We've made it this far," Clara reminded him, drawing strength from his solid presence. "One more day and it will all be over, one way or another." "It'll be over the right way," Trace assured her, pulling back to look into her eyes. "The governor is a good man. Once he hears your testimony and sees the evidence we've gathered, Hollister's days are numbered." Clara wished she could share his certainty. "And then what?" she asked softly. "Then," Trace said, his hands warm on her shoulders, "you'll be free. Free to go wherever you want, do whatever you choose." "And if what I choose is to stay?" The question slipped out before Clara could reconsider it, laying bare the hope she'd barely allowed herself to acknowledge. Trace's expression transformed, hope and tenderness replacing determination. "Then I would be the happiest man in Montana Territory," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "Clara, these past days with you, they've changed everything for me." "For me too," she admitted. "When I fled Helena, I thought I was leaving behind any chance at happiness, at connection. I never imagined I'd find both in a stranger who rode beside me without asking why." Trace traced her cheek with gentle fingers. "Not strangers anymore," he murmured, before claiming her lips in a kiss that promised a future beyond the dangers of tomorrow. That night Clara slept fitfully, dreams of pursuit and danger alternating with visions of a peaceful life at the Lazy P. She woke before dawn, her resolve strengthened by the knowledge that today's actions would determine not just her fate, but the future of all those Hollister had wronged. The streets of Helena were quiet in the early morning light as their small party made its way toward the territorial offices. Two wolves moved ahead, a shadow among shadows, while Marshal Cooper and Trace flanked Clara and Mrs. Wilkins, their vigilance evident in every measured step. "No sign of trouble," two wolves reported when they reached the rear entrance to the government building, "but Hollister's men are gathering at the hotel where the governor is staying." "Then we'd best move quickly," Cooper decided, ushering them inside. The territorial secretary, a slight man with nervous eyes but a determined set to his jaw, met them in a narrow hallway. "The governor will see you now," he said without preamble, leading them through a series of corridors to a well-appointed office. Governor William Howard Tate was not what Clara had expected. Rather than the imposing political figure she'd imagined, the governor was a compact, energetic man with keen eyes and a direct manner that immediately put her at ease. "Miss Sutton," he greeted her, rising from behind his desk. "I understand you have information regarding Judge Wilson's murder." "Yes, sir," Clara replied, gathering her courage. "I witnessed it firsthand." The governor gestured for her to sit. "Then I'm listening, every detail if you please." For the next hour, Clara recounted everything, the day of the murder, what she had seen and heard, and the subsequent pursuit that had led her to flee Helena. Trace added his own testimony regarding Hollister's other crimes, including the circumstantial evidence surrounding Daniel Prescott's death. Marshal Cooper presented the documentation they had gathered over years of careful investigation, land records showing fraudulent claims, witness statements about threats and intimidation, financial records suggesting bribery of officials. Throughout it all, Governor Tate listened intently, asking occasional questions but mostly absorbing the weight of evidence being presented. When they finally finished, he sat back, his expression grave. "This is the most comprehensive case I've seen against Hollister," he acknowledged, "but it still rests primarily on your testimony, Miss Sutton, your word against that of the most influential man in the territory." "My word is true," Clara said simply, "and I'm willing to swear to it before any court." The governor studied her for a long moment, then nodded decisively. "I believe you," he said. "More importantly, I believe in the rule of law, even especially when it applies to men like Victor Hollister." He turned to Marshal Cooper. "Prepare arrest warrants for Hollister and his known associates. I'll sign them immediately. We'll take him into custody during the celebrations, where he'll have no opportunity to slip away or destroy evidence." "Sir," Cooper cautioned, "Hollister rarely goes anywhere without armed guards. A public arrest could endanger innocent bystanders." "A valid concern," the governor acknowledged. "What do you propose instead?" As Cooper and the governor discussed tactical options, Clara felt Trace's hand close over hers, a silent gesture of support and shared triumph. They had done it, made their case, been believed. Justice for Judge Wilson, for Daniel Prescott, for all of Hollister's victims was finally within reach. The celebration on Helena's Main Street was in full swing by midday. Banners hung from buildings, a brass band played patriotic tunes, and the citizens of the territorial capital had turned out in their finest to honor Founders' Day and welcome the governor. Clara watched from the shadowed interior of a millinery shop as Governor Tate took the podium erected in front of the courthouse, delivering a speech about justice, progress, and the promise of Montana's future. From her vantage point, she could see Victor Hollister in the front row of dignitaries, a large man with a florid face and cold eyes, his expensive suit and gold watch chain advertising his wealth and status. Beside her, Trace remained vigilant, his hand never far from the revolver concealed beneath his jacket. "Cooper and his deputies are in position," he murmured. "Two Wolves is watching the alleys in case any of Hollister's men try to slip away." Clara nodded, her heart pounding as the governor's speech reached its conclusion. "And so," Tate was saying, his voice ringing out over the crowd, "it is my solemn duty to ensure that justice prevails throughout this territory, that the law protects the weak as well as the strong, the poor as well as the wealthy." He paused, his gaze finding Hollister in the audience. "In fact, I believe we have business to attend to right now, concerning that very principle." A ripple of confusion passed through the crowd as Marshal Cooper stepped onto the podium, flanked by deputies. "Victor Hollister," Cooper announced, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent gathering, "you are under arrest for the murder of Judge Raymond Wilson and for numerous other crimes against the people of this territory." Pandemonium erupted. Hollister's face contorted with rage and disbelief as Cooper approached him with shackles. Several men moved to intervene, but deputies were already closing in, weapons drawn. "Now," Trace said, guiding Clara toward the back door of the shop, "while everyone's attention is on the arrest." They slipped into the alley behind the row of buildings, moving swiftly toward the prearranged meeting point where a wagon waited to take them back to the Lazy P, but as they rounded a corner, a familiar figure blocked their path, Wade Dalton, his gaunt face twisted with malice and a revolver leveled at Trace's chest. "Going somewhere?" Dalton drawled. "Hollister figured you might be involved, rancher, sent me to look for familiar faces in the crowd." His cold gaze shifted to Clara, "and look what I found." The missing witness, all dressed up like a lady. Clara felt Trace tense beside her, knew he was calculating distances and angles, weighing the risk of going for his own weapon. "It's over, Dalton," Trace said evenly. "Hollister's being arrested as we speak. The governor has all the evidence." "Then I've got nothing to lose, have I?" Dalton replied, his finger tightening on the trigger. "But I can still make sure you don't live to testify, miss." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Trace moved with lightning speed, shoving Clara aside as Dalton's revolver barked. Clara stumbled against the alley wall, a scream trapped in her throat as Trace and Dalton exchanged fire. Two shots, almost simultaneous, echoed off the brick buildings. Both men staggered. Dalton fell first, a look of surprise on his face as he collapsed into the dust of the alley. Trace remained standing, but Clara saw with horror the spreading crimson stain on his left shoulder. "Trace!" She rushed to him as he sank to his knees, pressing her hands over the wound. "Help!" she shouted toward the street. "Someone help us!" "I'm all right," Trace gasped, though his face had gone pale. "Just caught me in the shoulder." Footsteps pounded down the alley as two wolves and one of Cooper's deputies appeared, weapons drawn. Seeing the situation, they holstered their guns, the deputy kneeling to check Dalton while two wolves helped Clara support Trace. "Need to get him to a doctor," two wolves said, his usually impassive face showing concern. "Wound is clean through and through, but he's losing blood." The next hours passed in a blur of fear and desperate hope. The town doctor extracted the bullet, pronounced the wound serious but not life-threatening if infection could be prevented, and prescribed strict rest. Clara refused to leave Trace's side, maintaining her vigil through the night as fever set in, bathing his brow with cool water and praying as she had never prayed before. "Don't you dare leave me now," she whispered fiercely as Trace tossed in restless delirium. "Not when we've come so far." Dawn was breaking when Trace's fever finally broke, his eyes opening with clarity for the first time since the shooting. "Clara," he murmured, his voice weak but lucid, "you're still here." Of course I'm still here, she replied, tears of relief threatening to spill. Where else would I be? Hollister, Trace asked, grimacing as he tried to shift position. In custody, Clara assured him, gently pressing him back against the pillows. The governor has posted extra guards to ensure he reaches trial. Cooper says with my testimony and all the evidence, there's no chance of acquittal. Good, Trace said, relaxing slightly. That's good. Now all you need to do is heal, Clara told him firmly. The doctor says you'll recover fully, but you must rest. A ghost of Trace's usual smile touched his lips. Yes, ma'am. Recovery was slow but steady. As Trace regained his strength, news arrived that Hollister's empire was crumbling. Associates were turning against him, offering testimony in exchange for leniency. Hidden accounts were discovered, revealing the full extent of his corruption. The governor had appointed a special prosecutor to ensure the case proceeded without interference. 2 weeks after the shooting, Trace was well enough to travel. They returned to the Lazy P in a wagon driven by 2 wolves, the familiar valley opening before them like a welcoming embrace. Home, Trace said softly as the cabin came into view. Never thought it could look so good. Clara, riding beside him on the wagon seat, felt a surge of emotion at the word. Home. In all her flight from Helena, all her fear and uncertainty, she had never expected to find a place that could feel like home again, let alone a person who embodied that feeling. As 2 wolves helped Trace into the cabin, Clara stood for a moment in the yard, looking out over the peaceful valley. The Lazy P was coming alive with spring, new calves in the pastures, wildflowers dotting the hillsides, cottonwoods leafing out along the creek. It was beautiful in a way she hadn't fully appreciated during those tense days after her arrival. Inside, she found Trace seated by the fireplace, his injured arm still in a sling but his color much improved. 2 wolves had discreetly disappeared after ensuring his friend was comfortable, leaving them alone. What are you thinking about? Trace asked, watching her with those perceptive eyes that seemed to see straight to her soul. Clara moved to sit beside him, taking his good hand in hers. About the day we met, she said. How frightened I was, how certain that trusting anyone would lead to disaster. Trace's fingers tightened around hers. And now? Now I know better, Clara said simply. You taught me that even here, especially here, people need each other, that the frontier doesn't have to mean isolation and fear. Clara, Trace began, his expression suddenly solemn. When I thought Dalton might, he paused, gathering himself. When I took that bullet, all I could think was that I hadn't told you clearly enough what you've come to mean to me. Clara's heart quickened. Tell me now, she whispered. I love you, Trace said, the words straightforward and true. I think I started falling in love with you that first day on the trail when you faced me down with more courage than sense. His smile was tender. I know it's fast, and I know you might still want to move on once Hollister's trial is over, but… I don't, Clara interrupted, squeezing his hand. Move on, that is, I love you too, Trace Prescott, and if you'll have me, I'd like to stay, not just until the trial, but forever. The joy that bloomed on Trace's face was answer enough, but he pulled her closer, his good arm wrapping around her waist. I was hoping you'd say that, he murmured before his lips met hers in a kiss that felt like coming home. 1 year later, Clara stood on the porch of the expanded cabin, watching as Trace and his ranch hands guided a new herd of cattle into the north pasture. The Lazy P had prospered over the past months, growing from a modest operation to one of the most successful ranches in the county. Victor Hollister had been convicted of murder and a host of other crimes, sentenced to hang for his offenses against the territory and its people. His empire had been dismantled, his ill-gotten gains reclaimed and redistributed to those he had wronged. Wade Dalton and his fellow gunmen were either dead or imprisoned, but more important than justice had been the healing that followed. Clara had found not just safety at the Lazy P, but purpose and belonging. Her skills with numbers and correspondence had helped transform the ranch's business prospects. Her testimony at Hollister's trial had brought closure to many families who had suffered under his corruption. And in Trace, she had found a partner in every sense, a man whose quiet strength and unwavering integrity had restored her faith in humanity and in herself. As if sensing her thoughts, Trace looked up from the cattle drive, raising his hand in greeting. Clara waved back, her wedding ring catching the sunlight. Their marriage 3 months ago had been a celebration not just of their love, but of survival and new beginnings. The small church in the nearby settlement had overflowed with well-wishers: Marshal Cooper, Mrs. Wilkins, 2 wolves, Governor Tate, and scores of others who had become friends and allies during their stand against Hollister. Mrs. Prescott, Trace called as he rode toward the cabin, dismounting with the fluid grace that still made Clara's heart skip. "How are the accounts looking?" "Very promising," Clara replied, meeting him at the bottom of the porch steps. "The Army contract came through. We'll be supplying beef to Fort Benton through the winter." Trace grinned, pulling her into an embrace despite his dusty clothes. "Good news indeed, worth celebrating, I'd say." "I have something else worth celebrating," Clara said softly, placing his hand gently against her still flat stomach. "Something that should arrive around Christmas time." Trace went utterly still, his eyes widening as her meaning registered. "Clara," he breathed, wonder and joy transforming his features. "Are you certain?" She nodded, her own happiness too great for words. Trace lifted her off her feet, spinning her in a circle of pure joy before setting her down gently. "A family," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Our family." "Our family," Clara agreed, resting her head against his chest, listening to the strong heartbeat that had become her anchor in the world. Standing there in the golden Montana afternoon, surrounded by the home they had built together, Clara marveled at the journey that had brought her here. She had fled Helena in terror, certain that her life was over. Instead, she had found a new beginning with a cowboy who rode beside her without asking why, a man whose quiet courage and unwavering support had shown her that even on the harsh frontier, love could not only survive but flourish. The wilderness that had once seemed so threatening now felt like protection, a vast, beautiful sanctuary where they would raise their child in safety and love, teaching him or her that the true measure of strength was not how fiercely one fought alone, but how bravely one opened one's heart to others. "I love you, Trace Prescott," Clara whispered, lifting her face to his. "And I love you, Clara Prescott," he replied, sealing the promise with a kiss as the Montana sun bathed them in its golden light, blessing the future they would build together, one day, one moment, one precious memory at a time.